In this video, I'm going to speak about the research process of your PhD. Throughout your PhD, you'll write typically 3, 4, 5 papers, depends on the PhD. And this will be over a period of time of 3 years if you're a full-time student, and around about 5, 6, 7 years if you're a part-time student. Each paper is different as well, so it could be a trial in a laboratory, it could be surveys, interviews, it could be a review article. Not every paper you'll do in a PhD will be the same. You will have some variations. And what I'm going to do is break down more so a traditional laboratory paper that you're doing in your PhD. So here's the whole process. I'm going to go through all of these one by one. And I'll start off with the first element, which is planning. So you're going to plan your paper. You're going to discuss this with supervisors, but also with external advisors. So for example, in my PhD, I had people that worked in professional football, working for teams. They weren't my supervisors, but they gave me a really good second opinion on what to do. So this planning stems from your proposal, which is another video on the channel. But even after your proposal's been sealed, you'll still discuss some of the nooks and crannies of your study before you really get going. So once you've got an idea in place, you'll get ethical approval. So this is a very short form that you'll fill in and essentially give the details of your study. So what's the methodology, why are you doing the study, what will you be doing? You have to give this to a panel who'll read it and then base it on the safety of your study and is there any risk that you can harm the participants. And normally this gets through ethical approval. Each PhD is different, but normally you're okay. You will get through this process fairly quickly, and then you move on. You need to get participants for your study. So this is where you recruit. And normally you'll use social media, advertisements, or even word of mouth, if you know people, to try and get participants to do your study. Nowadays, Twitter, Instagram is a really common way of getting participants, but as mentioned, there are different ways that you can do it. You then move on. So you've planned it, you've got ethical approval, you've got the green light, you've recruited, you've got people in, they come into the lab, and as a PhD student, you may feel you're alone, but you're not. When you do a study, normally you work in a team, you will collect data with other people helping you, and you'll spend quite a lot of time in this laboratory collecting data, and each study is different. It could be a 6-week period, it could be 12. Some people do longitudinal studies. It could even be a year you're in the lab getting your data. Once that's done, you can start writing the paper and finishing it. There are certain parts of the paper you can write during your data collection, such as the introduction and methodology, but now you got the data, you can write the results and you can write the discussion as well. Typically a paper is around about 3,000 or 4,000 words. It's not like your dissertation at undergrad level where it's 10,000 words. It has to be much more concise at the PhD level. And then the dreaded part at the end, which can be quite difficult, is to publish it. So what you do is you've written your paper, you've shared it with your co-authors, your supervisors, and you decide it's ready. I'm going to send this off now to a journal company. And this can be quite a slow process. So the way it works is you'll choose a particular company. There are loads, by the way. So there's sports medicine, there's JSS on the right-hand side here. If you go on Google and type in sports science journals, you will find a lot. But you'll send it off. It goes firstly to the editor. The editor will have a quick look at it. They'll decide if they feel it's worthy enough to go to reviewers. If so, it goes to 2 people who review the paper and they decide whether it's accepted to be published or they will reject it. So this whole process, the timeline varies across different studies, but you're looking around about 12, 18 months. If you're doing a longitudinal study, so a year, 18 months, of course that's going to be extended. You're looking at 2.5 years from day one to then getting it published. Different things can slow it down as well. So I've mentioned ethical approval is generally okay. Sometimes it's not. There are certain PhD topics which are a bit more difficult to get past ethical approval. So that can slow it down if your ethics is rejected, if there are things you need to change in your study. Another thing you can't control is recruitment. So you may aim to get 100 people, you're stuck on 30, 50, 60, and that's difficult. And that can take time to bump up your numbers and get the people you need. But from my own experience, everyone's different in a PhD, but for me, the slowest process can be publishing. You can control a lot of stuff in your study. You can't really control the publishing element of it. It goes to the two reviewers. They decide, it's their opinion whether they feel it's worthy of being accepted or not. And if it's rejected, you start again. You have to find a new company to send your paper to, and that's another 3 or 4 months where you're waiting to hear the outcome of how your paper's getting on. So to summarize, what I'd say is research projects do go through a lot of steps. It's a slow process, and it is normal to run into issues. Participants might drop out, paper gets rejected 2 or 3 times. That's 9 months, 6 months where the paper's been on the shelf for a long time waiting to get published. So I just said a second ago, it's slow. It is a slow process at times, but you're not alone. Anyone that's done a PhD, anyone past a PhD that's doing research will say exactly the same. It can be a very slow process, but we all go through it. So you're not alone as a PhD student in this process. Okay, so this is the research process of a PhD. If you'd like to learn more about my process of what I went through, getting my papers published and collecting data, etc., get in touch. If you're in the process now of doing this and you want some advice, you can speak to me on Instagram at Sports Science Hacks or on Twitter at CJ Thompson 90. Okay, thank you for listening, and I'll speak to you again soon.